If you believe love only belongs to the young, what I'm about to share will change your heart forever. This is the story of Margaret and James, two ordinary people who lived through decades of joy, heartbreak, and quiet solitude, only to discover something extraordinary, their very first kiss at the age of 65. And trust me, this story is not just about romance. It's about hope, second chances, and the reminder that it's never too late for love. Margaret grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, were neighbors. Borrowed sugar without hesitation, and children played freely on the streets until the evening light dimmed. She had lived a steady life, married young to her high school sweetheart, raising 3 children, working as a schoolteacher for nearly 4 decades. She was dependable, hardworking, loved by her students, respected by her peers. For many years, her life felt full. Her husband, Richard, was a kind man, quiet but steady, and together they built what she thought would last forever. But life, as it often does, surprised her. After 40 years of marriage, Richard passed away suddenly from a heart condition. The loss shook her to her core. For months, she felt as though she were moving through fog, unable to comprehend the emptiness in her home, the silence in her bed, the absence of the man she thought she would grow old with. For years afterward, she convinced herself she was too old to think about romance again. She poured her love into her grandchildren, who adored their grandmother. She spent long hours in her garden, tending roses, marigolds, and lily, with the tenderness she no longer could share with a partner. Sundays were reserved for church, where she sang softly in the choir, her voice blending into hymns that sometimes made her eyes glisten with tears. Outwardly, she seemed strong. People admired her resilience, often saying things like, "Margaret, you're an inspiration." But deep down, she carried a quiet ache that no one could see. The evenings felt lonelier. The house seemed larger than it really was, and the silence echoed through the halls like a constant reminder of what she had lost. On the other side of town, James lived a very different but equally solitary story. He had been a postman for most of his life, delivering letters in the rain and sunshine, walking familiar streets, whistling to himself, and greeting neighbors with a warm smile. His routine brought him comfort, but his personal life was far less steady. He had married once, but the marriage ended in divorce in his 40s. For a while, he thought he might marry again, but the years slipped by, and soon he found himself facing retirement with no partner by his side. He filled his days with small joys, reading novels in the library, brewing strong cups of tea, occasionally attending community events, but when the evenings came, a loneliness sat with him like an uninvited guest. Sometimes he would look out of his window and see couples walking hand in hand, or older pairs sitting quietly together on benches, sharing the simplicity of companionship, and he would wonder if such moments were forever out of his reach. At 65, James told himself he had made peace with solitude, but in the depths of his heart, he longed for something more, a connection, laughter shared at the dinner table, a hand to hold in the dark, the warmth of another soul beside. Him doubt it was fate, or maybe just the gentle hand of life that brought Margaret and James together one spring afternoon. Margaret had signed up for a local community center book club. She wasn't expecting much. In fact, she almost didn't go. She had told her daughter she felt too tired, too set in her ways, too old for clubs. But her daughter insisted she needed to get out more, to meet people, to live again. Reluctantly, Margaret went. That's where James was, too. He had always loved books, especially old classics. Retirement had given him plenty of time to read, but he craved conversation, people to share thoughts with. And so, he too joined the book club. On that first day, Margaret walked in wearing a soft blue cardigan, her silver hair neatly tied back, her reading glasses perched on her nose. James noticed her instantly. There was something about her presence calm, graceful, yet quietly radiant that drew his attention. Margaret, on the other hand, barely noticed him at first. To her, he was just another friendly face in the circle of chairs, holding a book and waiting for the meeting to start. As weeks went by, though, things began to shift. James would make small observations about the characters in the novels they read, often adding a light-hearted joke that made others chuckle. Margaret found herself laughing more than she expected. She began to notice his eyes warm kind, with the sort of gentleness that comes from years of understanding life's struggles. She noticed the way he listened carefully to others, never interrupting, always respecting different perspectives. James, in turn, began noticing her too. He loved the passion in her voice when she spoke about literature, the way her hands moved slightly when she explained her points, the spark in her expression when she recounted personal stories tied to the books. One evening, after the club, James gathered the courage to walk Margaret to her car. They spoke about the book they had read, but soon the conversation drifted toward life, toward family, toward loss, toward what it means to grow older. That night, as Margaret drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. For the first time in years, she felt her heart beat a little faster. She brushed it off, telling herself, "Don't be silly. At my age? No, this isn't love." But deep down, something had awakened. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, James and Margaret began meeting outside of book club. They shared coffee at a little cafe downtown. They took slow walks in the park, watching children play and birds scatter across the sky. James would sometimes bring Margaret flowers, not roses, but small bunches of daisies or tulips, the kind of flowers that felt sincere rather than flashy. Margaret loved that. She hadn't received flowers in years, and the simple gesture touched her deeply. Still, neither of them had made a move beyond friendship. They were cautious. At 65, they carried decades of memories, responsibilities, and fears. Margaret sometimes wondered if it was wrong to feel this way after losing her husband. James sometimes doubted whether she could ever see him as more than a friend. And yet, beneath all those questions, their connection grew stronger. Then came that unforgettable evening. It was late summer, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. James and Margaret had gone to a small outdoor concert in the park. They sat on a blanket, listening to an old band play songs from the 60s and 70s. Couples young and old were swaying to the music. James watched as Margaret closed her eyes, humming softly to a tune she recognized. Something inside him told him this was the moment. His heart pounded in his chest like he was a teenager again. He leaned a little closer and whispered, "Margaret, can I tell you something?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, her expression calm but curious. "Of course," she said. James hesitated for a second, then spoke. "I never thought I'd feel this way again, but being with you has brought me back to life." His voice trembled slightly, and Margaret's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The music, the chatter, the laughter around them all faded into the background. Margaret smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I feel the same," she whispered. And then, with the gentlest courage, James leaned forward. Their lips met soft, tentative, filled with years of longing, yet carrying the innocence of a first love. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a spark that reignited something they thought was gone forever. Their first kiss at 65 wasn't about passion alone. It was about healing, about rediscovering, about knowing that love doesn't have an expiration date. From that day forward, their bond only deepened. They began to share more of their lives, introducing each other to family, spending holidays together, cooking meals side by side. Margaret's grandchildren adored James, who always had a funny story or a gentle trick to make them laugh. James's quiet evenings were no longer lonely. He now had someone to hold his hand, someone to share his tea with, someone who made every sunset feel like a gift. They learned to dance slowly in the kitchen, to laugh at their own forgetfulness, to comfort one another when old aches or illnesses appeared. They discovered that intimacy at their age wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, tenderness, and gratitude for the time they still had. What's most beautiful about Margaret and James's story is not just that they found love again, but that they proved something to all of us, that intimacy, affection, and romance aren't reserved for the young. Society often makes us believe that passion fades with age, that love belongs only to the first chapters of life. But Margaret and James showed that sometimes the sweetest chapter comes last. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt that it's too late for love, let this story be a reminder. Your heart does not grow old. Love can find you at 25 or 65, at 40 or 80. All it takes is courage, openness, and the willingness to say yes to life again. Margaret and James didn't plan their love story. It found them when they least expected it. And their first kiss at 65 became the beginning of a love that would warm their hearts for the rest of their days. Because in the end, age is just a number, but love is timeless.